You've been really digging into this whole consciousness thing lately, haven't you?
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating stuff.
I mean, how do we go from an abstract thought to, like, actual action?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It really is. Like, when we think about those cave paintings, how did those ancient artists even begin to, like, conceptualize those images? What was going on in their brains?
Well, it's a question that has puzzled scientists and philosophers for centuries. To really get a grasp on it, we need to zoom in on the brain itself, the machinery that makes it all possible.
Okay, so sign me up for that close-up.
But where do we even begin?
I mean, the brain is just this massive, interconnected network of billions of cells. It's mind-boggling.
Absolutely, but we can break it down step by step, just like, well, think about one of those prehistoric artists deciding to draw a bison on the cave wall. They have to move their arm.
Right, so muscles are involved.
Exactly. And that movement is triggered by a whole chain of events that starts way up in the brain. It all begins with a thought, an intention to move, and that intention gets translated into a series of electrical signals.
Okay, so we're talking about an electrical circuit of sorts.
Kind of, yeah, but it's way more complex than any circuit we've ever built. The basic unit of the circuit is the neuron.
Those brain cells.
Right, and they transmit information through these things called action potentials. They're like electrical impulses.
Okay, I've heard of action potentials, but how do those actually work?
So imagine a neuron, like a long, thin cable with special coating. It's called the cell membrane.
Okay, what does that do?
It acts as a barrier separating the inside from the outside of a neuron. And here's the important part. There's a difference in electrical charge between the inside and the outside.
So the neuron's like a tiny battery all charged up and ready to go.
Exactly. Now, embedded in this membrane are these remarkable proteins called ion channels.
Ion channels, what are those?
Think of them like tiny gates. Yeah, that can open and close, allowing charged particles called ions to flow in or out of the neuron.
Okay, so when a neuron receives a signal from another neuron, what happens?
It causes some of these ion channels to open up.
And that changes the electrical charge inside the neuron.
You got it. This sudden change triggers a cascade effect, like a domino chain. More ion channels open up, more ions flow in, and that change in charge propagates down the neuron. This wave of changing electrical potential, that's the action potential.
So it's not a continuous electrical current. It's more like a wave of opening and closing gates.
That's a great way to think about it. And what's mind-boggling is the speed. Those ion channels are working at an incredible pace. We're talking about 100 million ions passing through a single channel every second.
Wow, that's lightning fast.
Yeah.
But our brain isn't just one giant neuron, right?
Right.
So how does the signal jump from one neuron to the next?
That's where things get even more interesting. Neurons communicate with each other at these specialized junctions. They're called synapses.
Synapses.
Yeah. So when an action potential reaches the end of one neuron, it triggers the release of chemical messengers. They're called neurotransmitters.
So it goes from an electrical signal to a chemical signal.
Exactly. These neurotransmitters cross a tiny gap between the neurons and bind to receptors on the receiving neuron.
And that starts a new electrical signal in the next neuron.
Exactly, like a relay race, passing the message along. And this happens billions of times all throughout our brains, every single second.
It's a lot of signals flying around. It's amazing to think that somewhere in all of that, consciousness emerges.
Yeah, but how? That's still one of the biggest mysteries in science.
How do all those electrical and chemical signals, all those tiny little blips and bursts, come together to create this sense of self, this feeling of awareness?
It's a question that continues to baffle scientists. They call it the binding problem. We don't have a physical location in the brain where all these signals converge.
So there's no central processing unit.
Nope. It's more like, well, you could think of it like a tapestry
A tapestry.
woven from countless individual threads.
Okay, so to recap, we have this insanely complex network of neurons, firing signals at an incredible pace, communicating through trillions of synapses. And somewhere in that intricate dance of electrical and chemical signals, consciousness arises.
It does.
But the question remains, how? What's the loom that's weaving those threads into a coherent experience? Where's the self located in this symphony of activity?
Well, to answer that, we might have to venture into the realm of quantum mechanics.
Quantum mechanics in the brain. Wait, hold on. Are we really going there? Can we apply the laws that govern the subatomic world to something as complex as consciousness?
It might sound a bit out there, but there's growing evidence suggesting that these quantum phenomena might play a role in how our brains process information. And some of the most compelling clues come from those tiny ion channels we talked about earlier.
Okay, I'm listening. What's the connection between quantum mechanics and those super-fast ion channels?
Well, classical physics, the physics of everyday life, hasn't been able to fully explain the incredible speed and selectivity of those ion channels. They're not just letting any charged particle through. They're extremely picky.
So they have high standards.
They do, and they do this with astonishing speed.
So you're saying that the behavior of these ion channels is so strange, so far outside the realm of classical physics, that it might require a quantum explanation.
That's what some researchers believe. They propose that ions passing through these channels could actually be behaving like waves governed by quantum rules. Remember those crazy concepts from quantum mechanics like superposition?
Where a particle can be in multiple states at once.
Yeah.
That's definitely mind-bending.
Right, or entanglement, where particles can be linked together even when they're miles apart.
But how could those concepts apply to something like an ion channel?
It's still an open question, but one promising area of research is focusing on this idea of quantum coherence. It means that ions, instead of behaving like individual particles bouncing around randomly, might be acting in a more coordinated way.
So like a synchronized dance troupe.
Exactly. And this coherence could be what allows for the incredibly fast and selective transport of ions through those tiny channels.
Okay, so we have these ions, possibly behaving like waves, flowing through these channels in a coordinated quantum coherent way. But how does that explain consciousness? How does it help solve the binding problem?
Well, for that, we need to zoom back out and look at another aspect of the brain. Its electromagnetic field.
Hold on, our brains have an electromagnetic field. Is that like an aura?
Not quite an aura in the mystical sense. It's a real measurable field, though.
Yeah.
Generated by all those electrical signals firing in our neurons. And what's even more fascinating, this field doesn't just passively reflect brain activity. It can actually influence it.
So it's like a feedback loop. Our thoughts create an electromagnetic field, and that field can then loop back and influence our thoughts.
That's the idea. And some scientists think that this electromagnetic field, which spans the entire brain, could be the key to solving the binding problem.
Okay, so how could it do that?
Well, it integrates information from all those different regions, right? So maybe it acts like the loom, weaving all those individual threads of neural activity into the tapestry of consciousness.
Okay, so we've gone from superfast ion channels to quantum coherence to the brain's electromagnetic field as a potential unifier of consciousness. This is a lot to take in, but I'm with you so far.
Good.
So where do we go from here?
To really understand how this electromagnetic field might be playing a role in consciousness, we need to look at something called synchronous firing.
Synchronous firing. What's that?
It's when large groups of neurons fire together in a coordinated way, like a chorus of electrical activity.
So instead of each neuron doing its own thing, they're all syncing up. But how does that relate to the electromagnetic field?
Well, some research suggests that the brain's electromagnetic field might actually influence the synchronous firing, like it's acting as a conductor,
Okay.
bringing all those individual neural instruments into harmony.
So the field is like a choreographer, making sure all the dancers are moving in sync.
I like that. And the really cool thing is, synchronous firing is one of the few things we know that correlates strongly with conscious awareness.
Wait, are you saying that this electromagnetic field, potentially influenced by quantum phenomena at the level of ion channels, could be what orchestrates the synchronous firing of neurons, and that this synchronous firing is what gives rise to our conscious experience?
That's a big statement, and it's still very much a hypothesis. But it's a fascinating possibility.
It is.
And it could completely change how we understand how the mind works. But we need to dive into the evidence for how these electromagnetic fields actually influence neuron activity.
Okay, lead the way. This is getting really interesting.
It is. Let's think about something simple like finding your glasses.
Okay, I can work with that. I actually lose mine all the time.
So what do you think is happening in your brain when you're searching for them?
Well, at first it's probably just firing in all sorts of random directions, right?
Yeah, different neurons activating as you scan the room. But then, when you spot those glasses, bam! A whole bunch of neurons associated with glasses all fired together, synchronized.
So it's like my glasses neurons are having a party.
Exactly. And that synchronized firing, that creates a stronger signal, a more coherent pattern of activity. And that rises above the noise of all the other neurons doing their own thing. That's what allows the signal to reach your conscious awareness.
So synchronous firing is like a spotlight.
Yes.
It amplifies the signal, bringing it to the forefront of my attention.
Precisely. And the fascinating part is that the brain's electromagnetic field might be playing a role in orchestrating this whole thing.
Hold on. How could something as intangible as an electromagnetic field actually influence the firing of physical neurons?
Well, remember when we talked about external electromagnetic fields
Yeah.
influencing brain activity? Think of things like transcranial magnetic stimulation, or TMS.
Oh, yeah, that's where they use magnetic pulses to stimulate specific areas of the brain, like to treat depression and stuff, right?
Exactly. So if external electromagnetic fields can influence neuron activity, then it stands to reason that the brain's own internal electromagnetic field could be doing something similar,
Yeah.
maybe even more subtly and dynamically.
So the brain is essentially stimulating itself.
Yeah.
That's pretty wild.
It is, and it could be a crucial piece of the puzzle when it comes to understanding how consciousness works. Think about it.
Okay.
The electromagnetic field, it spans the entire brain, right?
Right.
Integrating information from all those different regions. So it could be the unifying force, the conductor that brings all the individual neural instruments into harmony.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this all fits together.
Yeah.
But this brings up another big question for me. We keep talking about the brain's electromagnetic field as a kind of conductor.
Right.
But where's the composer? What's actually generating the music? The thoughts and the intentions that are driving all of this activity?
No, that's a deep question. And that gets to the heart of the debate about free will and determinism,
Uh-oh, are we about to go down a rabbit hole?
I might.
Okay, but seriously, are our thoughts just the product of biochemical reactions and electromagnetic fields? Or is there something more? Some kind of spark of agency that allows us to make choices?
It's a question worth exploring, because at the end of the day, trying to understand consciousness is really about understanding ourselves,
I like that.
our place in the universe,
Yeah.
the very nature of reality itself.
Okay, I'm ready for that journey.
Good.
But before we get too philosophical, can we circle back to those cave paintings for a second?
Sure.
Remember, we started this conversation by wondering what was going on in the minds of those artists.
Yeah.
Does this new understanding of the brain and consciousness give us any new insights into that ancient mystery?
It's an interesting question. Just picture those artists, right? Illuminated by flickering torches, their hands moving across those cave walls, translating those mental images into physical form.
What was the interplay between their thoughts, their intentions, and the physical actions that created those masterpieces?
It makes you wonder, right?
Yeah, it really does.
Were they tapping into something profound, something beyond the purely physical act of painting?
Right, like they were channeling some ancient creative force.
It's tempting to think so. Maybe those artists, in their creative endeavors were engaging with some of the same processes we've been discussing. The dance of neurons, the flow of ions, the symphony of signals, all orchestrated by the brain's electromagnetic field.
It's almost like those cave paintings were the first hints of this whole interconnected web of consciousness.
It's a fascinating thought.
And maybe, just maybe, those ancient artists were experiencing some of the same quantum phenomena that we're just starting to understand today.
Who knows, right? But it reminds us that the quest to understand consciousness isn't just a scientific endeavor. It's a journey that takes us to the very heart of what it means to be human.
It's almost like those ancient artists, illuminated by flickering torches, were tapping into some kind of universal energy field,
Yeah.
a cosmic canvas that connects us all.
And maybe we're still doing it today. Every time we create something, every time we connect with someone, every time we experience the world with awe and wonder.
It definitely gives you a new perspective on things.
It does.
The power of art, the power of human connection, the power of thought itself.
It really does. And it reminds us that there's still so much we don't know, so much more to explore.
So what does this all mean for us, for the listener who's been on this journey with us? What can we take away from all this exploration of consciousness?
I think it invites us to look at the world with fresh eyes,
Yeah.
to question our assumptions, to embrace the mysteries that still surround us.
To remember that we're not just biological machines. We're beings of energy, of consciousness, of potential.
And that potential is vast, still largely untapped. Who knows what we'll discover as we continue to delve into these mysteries, the brain, the universe, the very nature of existence itself.
It's an exciting time to be alive, to be a conscious observer in a universe that's constantly revealing its secrets. And on that note, I think we'll wrap up our conversation for today.
It's been a fascinating journey. Until next time, keep those neurons firing, keep those electromagnetic fields humming, and keep exploring the vast and wondrous landscape of your own consciousness.